So today, we're digging into a really fascinating proposal, one that tries to tackle two of America's toughest problems at the exact same time. It's a story that's not just about crisis, but about a super creative and, honestly, practical solution. Okay, let's get into it.
Just think about this for a second. Picture a college campus that's going quiet. All those empty dorms, dining halls, big open spaces. Now picture a city that's really struggling with homelessness. What if the solution to one crisis was literally sitting right inside the other? That's the huge question we're exploring today.
Okay, so first, we got to wrap our heads around the scale of the problem in higher education. There's been this kind of perfect storm brewing for years, a mix of money troubles and demographic shifts, and it's really starting to hit hard.
At the very heart of all this is something called the enrollment cliff. And look, this isn't some super complex economic theory. It's just basic math, really. Back during the Great Recession, birth rates in the US took a nosedive. Well, now, all these years later, that generation is about to reach college age, and there are simply fewer of them.
You know, that word cliff can be a little misleading. It makes you think of a sudden dramatic drop. But experts say it's more useful to think of it like rolling down a really steep hill. It's this steady, relentless slide that gives schools some time to react, sure, but that downward pressure, it's constant and pretty much unavoidable.
And yeah, the numbers really back this up. The economist Nathan Grave, who's done a lot of work on this, projects a 12 percentage point drop in the number of traditional 18-year-old college students between 2025 and 2030. Now, for a college that relies on tuition to keep the lights on, a hit that big is a direct threat to its very survival.
And this isn't some far-off theory. It's already happening. We're seeing colleges close at a pretty alarming rate. In fact, the Federal Reserve has projected that as many as 80 institutions could shut their doors for good by the end of this decade. We're talking about real schools, with real students and faculty just gone.
And here's why these closures hit so hard. A college isn't just a place to learn. It's often the biggest employer in town, a cultural hub, the economic engine that keeps everything running. So when one closes, the ripple effects can be absolutely devastating for a local community. We're talking massive job losses and hollowing out the entire town's economy.
All right, so let's switch gears for a second and talk about that second crisis. Because while all these campuses are emptying out, our cities are grappling with the immense challenge of homelessness. And it's a problem that's defined by both human suffering and just a staggering public cost.
Get a load of this number. A pilot program in San Diego found that just one person who is stuck cycling through emergency rooms, jails, and temporary shelters can cost the public over $100,000 a year. I mean, think about it. That's a staggeringly expensive and inefficient way to manage a crisis.
You can really see the two different worlds here, right? On one side, you have the system we've got now, this chaotic, expensive cycle of emergency services that don't really fix the problem. And on the other side, you have the goal, permanent, supportive housing, which is all about creating stability and actually addressing the root causes with services all in one place.
So here's the bottom line. Our current approach just isn't working. It costs a fortune, it doesn't really help people find long-term stability, and it puts this unbelievable strain on our first responders and our emergency systems. Something has to change.
Okay, so we've laid out these two massive, seemingly unrelated problems. We have all these underused public buildings on one hand, and a desperate, growing need for stable housing on the other. And this is where things get really interesting. This is where this innovative proposal comes in.
So here it is, the core of the campus-to-community model, or C2C for short. It's one of those ideas that's so simple, it's brilliant. Take the infrastructure we already have but don't need anymore, like college dorms and kitchens, and turn them into the very thing we desperately need more of, supportive housing communities.
So how does it actually work? Well, it breaks down into 4 pretty clear steps. First, you repurpose the existing campus buildings. Then, you convert them into permanent housing units. Step 3, you bring in the experts, nonprofits, public health agencies, to provide all the necessary services right there on site. And fourth, and this is crucial, you pay for it by pulling together the different funding streams we're already spending on the crisis.
And this is the really clever part about the money. The C2C model isn't about finding a bunch of new cash. It's about redirecting the money we're already pouring into expensive, reactive things like ER visits and jail time, and instead investing it into proactive, cost-effective solutions like stable housing and preventative healthcare. It's a shift from crisis management to actual problem solving. And that right there is probably the most important thing to get about this whole proposal. This isn't about inventing a brand new system from scratch. It's a reorganization.
It's about taking the assets we already have and the money we're already spending and using them to create a system that's more effective, more humane, and way more financially responsible.
So the big question is, how do we get this from a cool idea on paper to something that's actually happening in the real world? Well, the C2C proposal lays out a really clear, actionable path for state governments to do just that. The plan is to start smart. You don't just flip a switch on this thing overnight. You'd launch with a pilot program, maybe 3 or 4 campuses to start. You'd want to pick sites in different kinds of places, urban, rural, especially in regions where homelessness is a major issue. And then you'd use a really rigorous evaluation system to measure the results and prove that it works before you even think about scaling it up.
So what does that actually mean? Well, it boils down to a pretty specific ask for state leaders. They'd need to pass legislation to authorize the pilot, help identify the first campuses for conversion, create the authority to blend all those different funding sources together, and, of course, approve a clear framework for how it's all governed and held accountable.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with that really powerful question. This is a proposal that asks us to look at our biggest challenges, not as separate problems, but as interconnected parts of a system that, well, with a little creativity and some political will, we might actually be able to fix. It suggests that maybe, just maybe, the empty halls of one crisis could become the hopeful homes for another.